there are a lot of people who need care, who need touch, who need presence. But again, it needs to come from someone who is very, very clean energetically
Yeah.
and is unblended and is not trying to meet their own needs through that connection, because they have their unmet needs that they're trying to meet through the therapeutic model or on the ceremonial mats.
Going Inside is a podcast on a mission to help people heal from trauma and reconnect with their authentic self. Join me, trauma therapist John Clark, for guest interviews, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Whether you're navigating your own trauma, helping others heal from trauma, or simply yearning for a deeper understanding of yourself, Going Inside is your companion on the path to healing and self-discovery. Download free guided meditations and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Excited to introduce my guest for today. Payam is a psychedelic, somatic, internal family systems practitioner and medicine carrier who interfaces with various traditional and non-traditional psychedelic compounds in the treatment of trauma and chronic pain. He collaborates internationally with world-renowned surgeons, physicians, psychiatrists, and therapists in the treatment of an underserved population. He also has presented his work at numerous medical conferences, reporting on the nature of pain through the unitary mind-body paradigm, while also demonstrating how to alleviate pain at the intersection of traditional shamanic psychedelic medicines and Western evidence-based practices. His work factors in the biopsychosocial, spiritual, and energetic elements of healing. By acknowledging and addressing the totality of the human experience, he has seen firsthand how it can have a dramatic effect on mitigating the patient's affective experience of trauma and pain. Payam, thank you so much for being here. And what else should people know about who you are and how you got here?
That was a mouthful. I didn't expect that kind of introduction. I think that covers it all. I think people will get a good sense of what I'm all about once we get into the meat of the matter.
Great. Yeah, you also mentioned before we hit record, you would like to lead us off with a prayer. So I'm very open for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Please.
All right. Let's jump in. Beloved Mother Earth, Grandmother Moon, Father Sun, Secret Spirit, the Spirit of Otak, the Spirit of Quetzalcoatl, the Spirit of Aya, the Spirit of the Fungi, the Spirit of Ape, the Spirit of the Sananga, the Spirit of the Heart, the Spirit of the Chumash Warriors, the Lakota Wisdom Keepers, the Spirit of my teachers in body and out, Ramdas, Bear Spirit, the Spirit of the Wolves, the Spirit of our ancestors, the medicine gatherers, the medicine makers, the medicine carriers, the Spirit of the seekers who are my teachers, our spirit brothers and our spirit sisters on the journey. I thank you, I honor you. Thank you for the nourishment of our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. Thank you for the healing. Thank you for the darkness, for without it we will not see light. Thank you for the pain, for without it we would not experience love and abundance. Thank you for bringing us together, John and I. Maybe meet each other from an open heart, open mind, so that we share wisdom, knowledge, and healing, so that we may be in service to those who seek us, the betterment of mankind, as we walk peacefully and gently on this earth. Aho.
Beautiful. Where should we go from here?
Wherever you want to go. Where shall we go?
I mentioned before we started, it would be so great as a starting off point to talk about psychedelics and IFS as an umbrella. I also know that both your background and your work goes into a lot of different down a lot of different roads. So I'd love to hear a little more of, I guess, about your story first, as to, again, kind of who you are and how you got here with this work.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll make it short because there's a lot more interesting stories that have nothing to do with me. But I was biopsych major in school, and I think Gabor Mate said all research is me search. Yeah. So I tried to find me search, to understand the nature of why I was suffering and going through tremendous amounts of suffering and depression and anxiety. Um, I left school and I pursued a career in the creative field in New York City. And again, I was always haunted by symptoms of trauma, but I never really had the proper care and the proper therapist or psychiatrist who really did much of an intake to take down my history of trauma. No ACEs score, nothing. Here's a pill, see you later. And I got to a point where I wanted to jump in front of a train. That was how bad it got, and I had to do something drastic, and that was meeting the medicines I actually work with, and that exploded me and opened me up to the nature of my suffering and what was repressed, which made perfect sense. And I had the wonderful support of my partner to help me, but there was really no proper care in terms of how everything that was elucidated for me through the facilitators that facilitated the medicine. Even though my mentor was a psychiatrist, more or less directed me to study various practices to get a sense of what was happening to me. I had the shamanic initiation. I got invited to assist in these ceremonies. And I was hip to the work of Ram Dass, obviously, because he was my spiritual teacher before I ended up doing any of this shamanic healing work. Gabor Mate was next. Through Gabor, I found Richard Schwartz, Frank Anderson, Susan McConnell, Chris Burris, and I was like, okay, get it. So here's this Western language and paradigm that uses language that I can now plug into this ancient healing method with all these beautiful medicines that are connected on so many different layers. So my work has really essentially been about marrying and bridging the gap between Western evidence therapeutic models and shamanic medicine, and walking both paths and trying to be in service as best as I can to the people that I work with.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm having the thought right now that I've had a few episodes so far that have been around this topic of Eastern and Western traditions, and how to do this type of work in what for what is for therapists like myself, a medical model, working in a medical model. I've also mentioned on the show before how I came to IFS was after focusing on being a trauma therapist for some years, realizing that trauma therapy is a spiritual process, and IFS is a model that honors the spirit. And there's so many branches off of IFS that bring us into spirituality, everything from self energy or chi or whatever people see self energy as, all the way into, like, I had Bob Falconer on here talking about unattached burdens and spirit possessions, right?
Yeah.
And then you get really close into shamanism. And
Yeah.
so there's these adjacent circles, these circles around IFS that I'm very interested in.
Yeah.
And really, I guess, helping clients lean into their spirituality, which I know is like a very basic concept, but that's kind of where we're at in large part, in terms of coming from a medical model like me, or having this, clinical degree and reporting to a board, a state board, and also seeing this, how imminent it is to bring spirituality into the room and into the healing process.
Yeah. I think that once we start to acknowledge the totality of the human experience, we can't divorce spirit from science. We cannot divorce body from mind. We cannot divorce the person from the environment. We cannot divorce the environment's relationship with us. We're interdependent. There's an interrelationship all these forces that inform who we are as human beings. I have personal friends who are basically walking the path that you're on.
Yeah.
They've sat with medicine, so they understand the nature of that, though they're working above ground and having to report to the insurance and the board and all these things. But unfortunately, where you're at is this very constrained model that limits the scope of your practice because how you work.
Yeah.
I remember listening to your last podcast, and where you had said, I really didn't get any trauma training.
Right.
It was like triage. But I'm sure you're hip to the work of Bessel van der Kolk, or if you just recognize how the body really is the recipient of all these energies. And when we've been traumatized, these energy imprints or trauma imprints live in our bodies, and these parts within us, whether they're structural or energetic or the psychic parts that live within our body, take those imprints, and how they become calcified and armored, and these parts get arrested in time within us, thereby creating these disorders and diseases, even though they're meant to compensate and protect. You see? So once we start to acknowledge the totality of the human experience and realize it's not a cognitive thing, and we could talk about this ad nauseum. I think that there are certain populations that require cognitive therapy, where it's all basically, CBT, EFT, EMDR, the things that you do, simply because they don't have, maybe they're dissociated, maybe they don't have the bandwidth of enough self energy to be present to work, maybe they're dissociated out of their bodies, and cognition is all they have, and that's a safe place to be in. But once you start to peel back the layers and realize that there's a lot more there, there's many, many different ways of these trailheads and plugging in whichever model that works at that particular moment. And it's not like peppering it in, but being like, okay, let's try to work with this model or this practice that I have with this particular individual that can be receptive to this particular practice, and allowing them to heal the way they need to heal.
Yeah, that's right. I think to your point, people didn't think their way into their trauma, and so they're not going to think their way out of it or kind of reason their way out of it, right? And on one hand, a lot of therapy is geared toward kind of insight-oriented therapy, really like talking about what happened or making sense from almost an academic level of what happened, or even of, why when I get close to someone today as an adult, I push them away. Oh, it has to do with my mom because she was, sometimes there for me, sometimes not. It's like, okay, great. So you have that understanding, like academically. Now what? Right? And the first time I walked a client through the unburdening process of IFS, my first reaction was that this is actually what real healing looks like, and spiritual healing looks like. As a parallel, something I went through recently was actually working with an energy worker. I went through and myself actually got trained in Reiki, which was very new to me, but exciting. And again, lots of parallels to IFS and life energy, source energy, and chi. All these things really overlapping. But then I worked with her, and doing table work as a client, and her process was very similar to the IFS unburdening process. So I know that protocol is way older than IFS, and you probably know a lot more about that than I do, but things like going back into the past, being there with the part in the way they needed someone to be, and energetically finding things that are not ours, whether it's legacy burdens, cultural burdens, or burdens carried from traumatic experiences, literally releasing that energy from my physical body, or from her perspective, my energy field, and then installing new qualities, installing new beliefs, doing a lot of tapping, physical work. The whole process was extremely physical for me. And it got me thinking, wow, I think therapy probably needs to be this physical as well, even though we're also often limited to sitting like you and I are right now, talking,
Well, yeah, I think that again, acknowledging the constraints and understanding the boundaries that the Western medical model has created in order to ensure the safety of the patient or the seeker. I don't call people patients; they're all seekers, and they're seeking
Yeah,
their healing. Um, the issue again is just because you're an IFS therapist doesn't mean you got your stuff sorted out. I certainly have come across quite a few that I'm quite concerned about, especially as they're going
hmm
into the psychedelic field. Just because you have an acronym before or after your name doesn't ensure that you're working in integrity, that you've sorted out your matters, and that you can be in self state when you're working vis-a-vis with someone who's got trauma,
yeah,
and learning to unblend and be completely present in your humanity as you're working. And all these things are also very equivalent to the work that I do, which I can get into if you'd like to
please.
touch on that. But um, human touch is important. Connection is important. We talk about developmental trauma, as you mentioned, or attachment trauma. It's all from a place of detachment or loss of attachment to your primary caregiver. And a lot of those attachment traumas, as you very well know, result later on into these personality disorders that we can see, even though I want to acknowledge, IFS is not pathologizing, but there are people on the spectrum, as I'm sure you know, and, there's a 0 and a
hmm
100, and we fall into the spectrum of things. All of us, we have these personality structures or archetypes, but when you have a parent because they're taxed because you're a financial minority, they're working two jobs, they're not present to care for you. They give you off to the neighbor who then molests you. Your mother comes home and then berates you or abuses you because she's taking the trauma of her life and her history and the work creates this perfect ecosystem of disorder and disaster within ourselves. And I'm not certainly not suggesting that those boundaries that are created are there for a reason, but um, to understand those boundaries are malleable and that we need to be in our humanity in the service to others, you see. And
Yeah,
yeah, of course, if you've got a borderline personality, a disordered client, and you have the idealization and devaluation piece, creating that boundary is very important because they're going to test it and they're going to push you, devalue you, and then go back into the cycle. And just being an essential self is critical. Those particular populations were people, and those populations are very tricky to work with, as I'm sure you know, and certain boundaries need to be met in order to create that container of safety, to not have backlash long term. But there are a lot of people who need care, who need touch, who need presence. But again, it needs to come from someone who is very, very clean energetically
yeah,
and is unblended and is not trying to meet their own needs through that connection because they have their unmet needs that they're trying to meet through the therapeutic model or on the ceremonial mats.
yeah. I want to ask you a general question on purpose, which is there's a lot of interest in psychedelics, plant medicine, altered states right now, both on the client side and what I hear from my clients who are wanting more, wanting to go deeper, or clients who, in our terminology, have like a treatment resistant depression or whatever it might be. And maybe they've had years of therapy with little to no results. Um, where does one start in terms of looking into either receiving this work or as a therapist helping facilitate it with someone like yourself? How do you find a reputable healer like yourself? Because I've also heard of it going wrong. I've had clients who've come back to me and said I had a really bad experience and the integration part wasn't there. I had a terrible trip and now I'm here, and me, the therapist, is here to kind of pick up the pieces. So I know that it's kind of the Wild West in some ways with this work. And
Yeah.
so even more important to do it
Yeah.
safely.
So traditionally, shamans came through a particular lineage, or they were elected by the community because they were um, esteemed because that particular person was known to be trustworthy and have a relationship with the spirit world, the medicine being integrity, be pure and clean, metaphorically and literally, and also have that relationship with the community, who then elected to have this individual as their healer, or the family. We don't have that in the West. Again, we're divorced from a community. We're divorced from connection. Again, this is a lot of our malaise, is the divorce from the domains that dictate who we are. The biopsychosocial, energetic, religious, spiritual. So there are a lot of people who, again, therapists unfortunately think that, and I'm not going to win many points by saying this, but I really don't care. Unfortunately, the way things are moving is, okay, so basically the therapists are being put into the position of the holy people, or the holy men and holy women of the Western society, being given this permission by the FDA and the NHS and whoever, to carry this very, very powerful medicine that they may not have a direct relationship with. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm a therapist, therefore I must know how to work with this medicine. And I'm sure that you understand how that can go very wrong very quick.
Yeah.
Recently, I actually facilitated a ceremony for a therapist who's like, "Oh yeah, well, I sat with medicine twice, and now I want to facilitate." And I'm like, mm-mm. That no, no. So that there's this piece of, just because you're a therapist does not make you a person of integrity, much less a person of integrity with medicine.
Yeah.
Sacred medicines. That's one piece. Now, what's beautiful, at least for the Western clinical model, is there are unfortunately those boundaries that are in place. And for certain clients who have had certain levels of trauma, where the clinical model feels safe with them, that's actually appropriate. That's one piece. And then also, again, ideally, I've, again, from colleagues and friends who work above ground or in clinical trials and so forth, and they've reported back, a lot of really dodgy things are happening above ground in the clinical models. And people are people. Just because you're a therapist, like I said, doesn't ensure that you're a person of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So
Yeah.
there's that piece. And then so again, there are a lot of these troubling things. And there's this, essentially, it's the wild, wild west. There's a lot of people that are really motivated by monetary gain, popularity, prestige, whatever it is, and really not fully aware of what they're not aware of, taking this really powerful medicine and be like, okay, we're going to work with this now. I get that we're in dire need as civilization to heal and to understand the nature of our predicament and perhaps wake up. But again, this needs to be dealt with very delicately and very respectfully, with reverence. And I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
Then we have the underground, which is where I essentially work out of. And the people in the underground are it really relies and depends on their reputation. Who are they? What does their name carry? Or what does the reputation behind their name carry? And that's really all people who are working underground have as a means to stand in their integrity.
Yeah.
That's one piece. And then again, the problem with shamanic wisdom or shamanic medicine as such is a lot of the maladies that they were confronted by initially, where these sacred medicines were used, were not the same maladies that the Western mind and the body are experiencing. And these people coming in with these maladies, that this technology can help and address these maladies, but this technology or the carriers of this technology may not have the language and understand how this technology, the power of this technology, can address certain maladies, which technologies should not be used for certain maladies. Again, and this goes to the personality structure of people. And then, I see quite a bit of cluster B personality styles that come to the ceremonial space. And those populations need to be worked with absolute delicacy and absolute care, for in their interest, and then also in my interest as well. You see what I'm saying? So these conversations need to be had very, very respectfully, as that's why I'm speaking with you, is we need to come together and understand where our limitations are, we don't know what we don't know, until we start to sit and get, oh, that's what I was missing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The dialogue needs to happen, because like I said, there's an interdependence and interrelationship of this all. So to answer your question, it requires a lot of research. It requires a client of yours perhaps to say, hey, what do you think about working with these medicines? And then this goes back to your responsibility as a therapist to understand the nature of these medicines, or at least understand what do these medicines do, which personality structures are appropriate to receive these medicines. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
What traumas can be addressed with these various medicines? How can it be integrated? Where you are in relationship to the facilitator, if you guys speak the same language and you can communicate with one another to do a lot of the preparation. And a lot of the preparation for psychedelics, in my view, is there's many managers on many different layers. And a lot of these managers are asleep until there's a trigger that wakes them up. Since we're in common consensus reality and one has not sat with medicine, they don't know what they don't know. So you deal with various managers as
Mm-hmm.
those managers are addressed on the journey towards the medicine. And then also managers being addressed and preempted post medicine, because there's quite a bit of backlash that happens with these managers in that process. We can talk about MDMA, and what I'm talking about, it's a whole big thing, and not many people are even cognizant, much less talking about these very delicate and nuanced things that turn up in the ceremonial space. So having quite a bit of work with the managers and so forth as best as possible. It's more basically like informed consent with the managers, and
Mm-hmm.
once you put someone on the mat, depending on which medicine, depending on the medicine combination, the dosage and duration, a lot of things can unfold. And that's really where a facilitator who's in integrity is going to be working to carry that person through. So a medicine carrier doesn't just give medicine and say, here you go, good luck, we'll see you on the other side. Like basically MAPS model is like, here you go, we're just going to sit here and make sure you don't lose your shit. And then, we'll do that integration.
Yeah.
My work
Yeah.
is very young, it's very, very participatory in the process. We can get into that if you like, but it's very, very involved from the beginning towards the end and post ceremony. So
Yeah.
there needs to be a community, even if there's one or two, such as like you and I, for this example, or working with an integrative doctor. There's some people that I'm working with who have quite severe cases. Some people are towards the end of the stage of life. Some have severe trauma. There's a whole bunch of factors, and all these factors need to be addressed as a community, as an integrative community, to see this person through with respect, with their healing ultimately in mind. That's a long, long answer.
Yeah. That's a beautiful answer. Um, and I really appreciate your message around, integrity and how to bring this to people in the right way. That is, touching on a qualm that I've had with it, again, as a therapist who sometimes I've had clients go and um, have these experiences and then come back and there's just zero integration. There was also zero preparation, which really bothers me and worries me, and a lot of bypassing of protectors. And then again, I'm here dealing with the fallout and the protector backlash and the exiles that are even more
Yeah.
wounded now. Um, and so, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That being said, like, how would one know if it's a good time to look into this work or to reach out to someone like you? And especially in the context of trauma, or having done some trauma work per se. Let's say they've done IFS, maybe they've done EMDR, things like this. And then they come and speak to someone like you.
Well, I wanted to backtrack a little bit, John, because you
Sure.
touched on something that I think is, again, critical and it's not being addressed. Okay. You mind bookmarking this question, because I'm
You
going to
got it.
lose it. Okay. So
Yeah.
you have it. This one piece about titrating the system into the ceremony space with the medicine again.
Yeah.
Um, how do the protectors know what they don't know? They don't know. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm not again, I'm not going to name this person's name. This person is working in integrity in a clinical trial.
Hmm.
And, he's basically saying we'll work with 5 grams. I'm like, who came up with this idea of 5 grams? That's mental. That's absolutely nuts to work with 5 grams of psilocybin. It's a massive, massive dose.
Mm.
Um, so they're coming up with these numbers that are just this arbitrary, okay, 5 grams is going to do it. And again, it's a very nuanced, and there's a whole bunch of different factors involved. But I'm of the firm opinion that if you titrate someone in to where their system starts to be like, okay, I see what's happening. I feel okay. The parts start to soften and start to relate with the wisdom of the medicine. Again, I'm talking about spirit medicines, also but talking about synthetic medicines, both of which have their own spirits in it. And the spirit of organic spirit medicines is a very benevolent entity or entities. The ayahuasca entity is one, but it's also plural. The silo entities and various other medicines, they're all a collective and an individual, but they're benevolent. Synthetics tend to allow us to arrive to essential self in a particular fashion, but mapped models 125 followed by 70 or whatever 80. That sends someone to 200 milligrams. It's a severe amount of medicine. People can dissociate in MDMA. People definitely dissociate in other medicines. Again, that's totally bypassed. Where's the healing of the person, or the witness is not there? You see, so it's like, okay, we gotta make this a actionable thing. 3 treatments, 66% less trauma, and then here you go, good luck with everything. But it's not as simple as that. And if you talk to medicine carriers or people who've been working underground therapists for 30, 40 years, they'll tell you it's definitely accelerates the process. It advances the process. It magnifies, it amplifies these non-localized parts of our psyche and our mind and so forth. And so we get to see it and work with it, but it still requires time. And people are of this impression that, okay, I'm going to go in and deal with my kidney cancer and then I'm going to be good to go. Well, a person who has kidney cancer has also had a life. And you can't just bypass life and the traumas that they experience just to go to kidney cancer, especially it's the first time working, you see? And then this piece about titrating inwards with various medicine dosages and durations really allows the body and the mind to soften, the relationship to develop in the ceremonial setting on the mat, and for permission by the parts, once they're with the medicine, I do this quite a bit, to then say, okay, like ask the medicine how much you think you need. And they come up with numbers. These people have never worked, and they're like, I need another 2. And I know that that's really probably a good number. And I give them 2 grams and they're good to go. And they're on the bridge of consciousness, and they can interface with the wisdom of the medicine. They're not being taken out by dissociative parts. They're working with me. They're working with the medicine. And that's where the healing comes. It's not about, we're just going to drown you in medicine and pray for the best.
Yeah.
You see, so again, then working very gently with permission of the system to gradually enter into the space is the healing process. It's not about bypassing them by drowning someone in medicine.
Make a lot of sense to me. The 2 thoughts. One is, I think this comes from in part the nature of trauma, and a lot of clients that come to my practice, there's this urgency of like, I realize there's this thing being this trauma and I need to kind of get it out of me. And so there's that piece. And there's this discomfort, this kind of claustrophobia internally of like, I need to get this out of me, or especially when people awaken to the idea that, oh my gosh, I have trauma, or I was abused as a child and I'm just now waking up to that. So of course I got to get it out. Right. On the other hand, there's a cultural component in our society. I mean, I live in Silicon Valley, where the culture is so extreme around optimizing things and efficiency, and a lot of that comes into the room too, where people want results and they want it now. And so they might come in and say, give me the maximum dose. I'm ready to, hit the moon. And it's frightening.
Yeah, I have the utmost compassion for people who are suffering. You and I are in the business of suffering.
Yeah.
I think that just because the medicine is there doesn't mean it's right for you. Just because the dosage is there doesn't mean it's the right amount for you. And it has to be done in a way that honors the body, the physical structural body, honors the energetic body, honors the psyche. Because if if the essential self as the witness isn't present to interface with these exiles that are literally unburdening energetically and releasing all the sexual trauma through the sexual organs, purging, screaming, whatever those unburdenings are in medicine. And if the system becomes overwhelming, it basically gets very close to what would resemble a psychotic episode in medicine, where all these parts light up.
Yeah.
And there it could be, imagine you and I are sitting together and all of a sudden 15 parts of yours turn up simultaneously all around you and are talking to you as the witness or essential self. And it gets so incredibly loud that you start to lose track of what's real, what's not real, who has what to say, and it overwhelms the system. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that could be somewhat healing for some people. I mean, I certainly went through some really, really rough medicine ceremonies. I don't advise it, and that's not how I generally, if ever, work, depending on who I'm working with and what my relationship is with them. Um, so I don't advise it. There has to be an essential self as the witness to be able to interface, or at least bear witness as these parts are unburning, and the witness or the self is witnessing that, and there is an interface in the medicine. Now remember, it's not only parts and self and the exile, there's also an entity that's the medicine, right? There's 4 factors
Hmm.
as just singular ones, and then there's the facilitator and the ceremony. So there's a whole bunch of things going on. It's not as simple as, okay, I'm going to go into my essential self, see this exile, the protections go away, and I'm going to go unburden this, and do a redo, and then voila.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, so that's why the conversations need to be had. That's why therapists need to really not only cognitively, like literary understanding of what
Yeah.
these medicines are. To understand it cognitively is one thing. To be in the medicine, to understand the medicine very deeply through your own visceral experience, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, this person, because they have so much ADD, may not be appropriate to work with the spirit medicine, because parts that created these diversions as distractions, these ADD parts, will go haywire. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? They may
Yeah.
need some other intervention with other medicines to calm down the parts of their ADD parts. I actually just did this work with someone um, who had ADD, and I know this relates to you, again, having
Hmm.
listened to your last podcast.
Hmm.
They're just protectors that have been running amok and creating chaos so that you don't deal with the exile and all the stuff that's actually underneath. And while they're helping you, they're also destroying your life. You see? So
Yeah.
when you go in and, for instance, you work with MDMA at 100 milligrams, as an example, these parts tend to be like, okay, we can chill out.
Yeah.
And these parts, I use this metaphor, and it really speaks to people who have ADD. It's like you're there in the middle of a snow globe, and the snow globe is constantly being shaken up, and all these parts are just constantly running amok, and you know what's in front of you, kind of, but it's like a storm that keeps everything fuzzy. And
Yeah.
with MDMA, the MDMA comes in and assures the safety of these protectors, and they start to settle, then the person is able to not only witness themselves as essential self, but then these other protectors that have been carrying a lot of these burdens, and perhaps burdens, a lot of these burdens naturally have to get released, or at least these protectors need to unblend a little bit and release a little bit of pressure for the self of the facilitator, the self of the seeker, to be able to work with them.
Yeah.
You see, and then get into the exile matters. That was a
Yes.
mouthful.
No, that was great. I'm following. Um, my understanding is that part of the appeal of began working with something like MDMA, plant medicine, even ketamine being such a huge, you know, topic right now, is that it can potentially accelerate the work. Or let's say with the client who's been doing IFS every week with a practitioner or a therapist or whatever, it can really open their system quickly. It can accelerate the work. I have heard of some people using plant medicines and having like spontaneous unburdenings. So when people hear that, they go, well, of course I want that, right? It's like a fast track. It's like a shortcut, right? Who doesn't want a shortcut? Um, is some of that like, does some of that hold water, that can be the power of working with these medicines, is it can accelerate the work if it's done carefully?
Yes, I think that we need to be very careful how we speak about this and make sure the nuances are acknowledged and addressed. So I'll
Yeah.
slow this down a little bit, and I
Yeah,
want you to
maybe
jump
a
in.
better question is
Yeah,
just
well, let's go back and forth on
yeah,
this one as therapist and
okay.
facilitator. Really, let's go back and forth. Okay, so
Yeah,
there is there can be these spontaneous remissions with these huge unburdenings. Um, I would say that I would safely say that I was one of them, even though I had to do quite a bit of work afterwards because
yeah,
this material was repressed and it didn't come up till I was 38. Um, and by all measures, I should be dead in a ditch with a needle in my arm, um, with what I endured as a child. Um, so there are those few individuals that are dedicated, and I'll use myself as an example. I had these explosive moments. I went into some really heavy stuff, but my life had the bandwidth because I didn't have anyone to answer to, and I literally changed chapters. I sold almost everything that I had and made some radical decisions because I didn't destroy someone else's life in the process of making these radical decisions and having the tools and the inner strength and the psychic structure to be able to work with this the very difficult material. Yeah.
yeah,
Problem is, again, we exist within a matrix that's dependent on us as we're dependent on it. And so you may get these big memos or these huge unblendings and these huge releases
yeah,
of these trauma imprints or these burdens, having these huge unburdenings. Hopefully you have a really good therapist, but your life may not support the shifts that need to happen in order for you to make really big radical shifts towards your healing. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
So there's that piece. So
Mhm.
what do you think about that as a therapist?
Um, I have some thoughts. I also had a clarifying question. When you reference this matrix, what exactly does that mean?
The matrix, the society, the outside of your family, the man or the woman you're married to, your relationship with your synagogue or your church or your mosque, all how you eat, how you're involved with the environment, all these things that literally inform who we are, the matrix of life.
Okay.
These
Yeah,
domains of human experience that
yeah,
we're related to and interrelated with.
yeah. Okay, that makes
Right?
sense.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
S-
Um, yeah, I
So
want you
give
to
me your
just keep
thoughts.
going.
What are your
I
thoughts
want
on?
you to keep
So we had some clarity there, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so um, as such, based on what I mentioned, it may not be suitable for you to get smashed into a million pieces because again, you go back into common consensus reality. You still have
Yeah,
to, after you do your retreat or coming back from Peru or Brazil or Mexico, where you've been facilitated for a week, 2, 3 weeks, or whatever, you have to come back to
yeah,
your life. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
So unless you are a single individual and with the right support of some elders, which we really don't have, maybe the therapist is your elder, hopefully you have a good one, and they have an understanding of what happened to you, you can be supported in making some more expedited decision making processes that unblend you from the matrix of life and work towards facilitating your healing.
Mhm.
Okay, that's one
Yeah.
piece. Now, here's another piece, which is the cluster B, and the personality structures and the system
Mhm.
um, of parts. Having worked, and I'm not a therapist, and again, I have friends who are therapists who are really really amazing, and we trade people off or we refer either me to them
Uh-huh.
or they to me. But certain personality structures are very hard to work with because those parts have been so galvanized. The self is like basically not only gone to the
Yes.
foundation, but it's gone down to the 10 floors underneath the basement, is buried as a means
Yeah.
to survive. You see what I'm saying? Best thing you
Yeah.
can do is try to get enough of these parts into self to try to create some level of harmony,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
very, very hard to get a self present to work with this primarily NPD, BPD. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
So, certain personality structures may not be suitable for these medicines because the self is again not there to bear witness and for the self to interface with the parts, because the parts have become so galvanized they think that they're
Yeah.
their personality. And that's my other view, is like,
Yes.
and this may be not the right medicine for you. Ketamine, now this is the caveat, that ketamine can be a good medicine to turn the default mode network off, to do a restart, um, which may be a beautiful thing. But MDMA, mm, it really depends. If there's
Mhm.
PTSD, for instance, and there's the acute trauma, um, and the protectors are running amok and creating flashbacks and so forth because they don't realize that they're out of the trauma, MDMA can be
Yeah.
a good medicine. But if there's BPD and PTSD and MDMA, not sure that that's the right way to go, because there's actually quite a bit of backlash that happens after that
Yeah.
protocol, working with that population.
Yeah.
Again, is it surface content material, and is the surface content material workable with enough self energy to unburden these protectors? And maybe that's all you get with working with MDMA. Silo is another matter.
Yeah.
Ketamine, can be helpful. So there's these
Yeah.
various medicines that can work with the surface content material and maybe unblend a
Yeah.
little bit and unburden and take the weight off. But
Yeah.
underneath, there's still the trauma imprint. And if the self is buried, 10 floors underneath the basement, I'm not sure.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is basically the way you keep this work safe with psychedelics, plant medicine, MDMA, etc., is really the same as keeping non-altered states work safe. The way we learn to keep IFS work safe, the way I've learned, which is go slow, work with protectors first and foremost, do not bypass protectors, keep checking for self energy basically at all times ad nauseum. Even when you think there's self energy there, just ask. And especially when we get toward wounded exiles, right? These scared, vulnerable parts that have been locked in the basement for so long, is we need a critical mass of self energy to bring toward to those parts. And again, I'm hearing that that's really the parallel to how you keep this work safe. Um, Another caveat in that, yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of caveats, is when self energy is there's very limited access to it, we can do things like direct access, or really we are borrowing the therapist's self energy when there's a lack of self energy in the client's system. I'm curious if that's even a parallel to how you work as a facilitator with this work.
Yeah. Um,
And we're almost out of time.
oh God.
And I'm sorry.
I think we should go for round two.
We will. We will.
Personally,
Let's consider this
because this is
part
a big
one, and
one. Um,
yeah, let's
I
plan to book another hour.
maybe bookmark this for round two, because this is a
Okay.
very, very critical piece, and this requires quite a bit of attention, and I'd like to devote
Yeah,
that without feeling like I'm rushed, if that's
of
okay.
course. Of course.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how much time we have. It was so good. Oh, damn,
Yeah, maybe
yeah,
maybe
a couple
5
more minutes,
minutes.
because because we're running
Yeah.
completely out of time. I didn't realize we were going through over. Yeah,
Yeah.
your lead. Let's take it however you want.
I guess in order to kind of put a pin in it for now, what are the main things you want to make sure people have heard today, or if they are going to go and jump on their computer and start looking into this work or asking, their current provider about this work, what should they keep in mind?
Well, I think one of the big pieces that I learned from my dear friend and colleague Chris Burris, which was, Payam, there's got to be enough flexibility. There's got to be a lot of malleability to where um, parts are not jumping from one to another to another to another like a Rolodex, and they're so caught in their partness that it's very hard to unblend and have a little bit of breath, and that breath allows the self to be witness. I think that working with spirit medicines requires self energy. And a lot of people, again, depending on their attachment needs, their personality structure, and so forth, play a lot of self, but they're not really self. And the
Yes.
therapists have to be really, really keenly aware of, are they playing self, and to what end, and are they playing self for attachment even for the hour that we have, and are they telling me what I need to hear in order to validate what they need to validate in order to go into medicine work. So to have enough self, enough bandwidth is one of those most critical pieces, and to ensure that you have the proper support as a seeker who has a great therapist, but also a really good facilitator who understands trauma, who understands the psyche, who understands um, archetypes or parts, and really works with integrity and has had a lot of experience. And it, for this case, as we're talking to an audience who is very interested in trauma work as either patients, seekers, or therapists, who's a facilitator who is not only trauma informed, quote unquote, but is trained in trauma and how to actually address trauma as it's happening and all the facets
Yeah.
and elements of caring for someone in that process on the ceremonial mat, which is it's a whole thing.
That last distinction you made, I think, is crucial. And a lot of therapists are waking up to this idea of like just being trauma informed versus being actually equipped to treat the trauma. And in my case,
Yeah,
thinking about how equipped and resourced am I to go walk into deep waters with my clients, especially those that are the most traumatized. Um, my capacity has to be there if I'm gonna go there with them, and their system can
yeah,
usually feel it. On the other hand, a lot of therapists will take them into deep waters and then not know what to do, and then some of those clients end up on my couch, and so, um, the work always goes back to our own system, and, this idea of we can't take clients further than we've gone ourselves, I think is very true no matter what
precisely.
modality you're using. I
To
really hold that to
your
be
point,
true, and yeah.
absolutely, that's
Mhm.
critical, and I think one of those most important pieces, again, as therapists who want to enter this work, again, people have come to me to want to train with me, therapists, and I ask them, are you willing to go to the edge of your sanity, and are you willing to swim in the depths of your own hell, and are you willing to see that in medicine space? Because if you don't understand that nature and what can happen, and this happens over years and years of experience, and
Mm,
I'm always surprised. There's never a dull moment when I'm on the mat. Always
yeah,
surprised what shows up, and it's all very welcome as it's contained, upheld in integrity and carried through. um, but if you open someone's can up and then you're like, well, I don't know what to do, good luck with everything, you're doing a lot more damage than you should. So the understanding
yeah,
the boundaries,
it's a
limits
nightmare.
of your own capacity as a human
Yeah,
being, what your limits are, what your exiles are going to get triggered by, and your system is clear and in hollow bone, which I can talk to you about next time we speak, because this is a methodology, it's a shamanic methodology, and I'm working with Chris Burris to weave in IFS language to allow people to understand
great,
what that means to be in hollow bone, which I'd love to talk to you about, to be in
great.
hollow bone and be able to address very distressing experiences for a patient or a seeker as a facilitator or a therapist. And being like, okay, here we are, and this is what's happening, and I'm going to carry this person through. And I know that they're not going to lose their minds, and they're not going to
Yeah,
put themselves in harm.
yeah, yeah, wonderful. We will absolutely book that second hour. So for those listening, stay tuned for that. We'll do that as soon as possible so we can keep building off this conversation. Payam, I can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you again for opening this dialogue in such a beautiful way with the prayer. Um, and I would love to have you back anytime. For those folks listening, can you say a little more just to wrap up as to how they can learn more about you and get in touch?
Yeah, payam.com, payam.com. I don't do social media. People that find me. I have a LinkedIn profile. You can put it on the show notes. I don't even know what the address is of that, but
Cool. We'll
please
find it.
go to my website. There's a lot of my lectures and resources of my teachers and what informs my work. And you can email me through there should you want to be in touch.
We'll do it. We'll put links to everything in the description, and yeah, stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation. So, Payam, thank you so much again, and we'll chat again real soon.
You got it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.